Welcome to the Fleet Success Show, a podcast dedicated to talking about the fundamentals, standards, and best practices that empower today's fleets to achieve fleet success. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back for another episode of the Fleet Success Show. As if it wasn't obviously apparent by the tone and pitch of my voice, Josh will not be hosting this week. I'm Cera Nelson, I'm the show's producer, and normally happily sit behind the mixer. However, Josh and Jeff are both out of the valley enjoying a reprieve from the Phoenix heat, and so that just leaves Steve Saltzgiver and I here running the show. Steve, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Great to be back on the podcast. It's been a few weeks for me.
Well, we are very grateful and honored that you could take time out of your busy travel schedule to pop on with us. For today's episode, we pulled a few questions from the NAFA Communities Board, and I'm going to be posing these very relevant questions to Steve and his hundreds of years of fleet experience. All right, starting off with question one, what are the standard expectation percentages for downtime?
Well, obviously downtime, especially in today's environment, is one of the most important metrics that we should be looking at. With all the supply chain issues and everything else going on out there, downtime is becoming more and more critical. So one of the things I always tell people is the most important metrics are your metrics. So the expectations really should apply specifically to you. But if you're looking at an industry acceptable metric, probably should be less than 5%. And if you think about the converse of that metric, which would be uptime or reliability of your fleet, that means your fleet would be up 95+% of the time. And the reason that's important is because if you don't have your vehicles on the road and they're not reliable, then you're not taking care of your customers, obviously. So that's really what you should shoot for. Now, I know that can be a challenge right now, particularly with the lack of parts, lack of mechanics, the time the OEMs and the dealers now take trying to fix your vehicles. So what I always advise people is to start somewhere. You know, if your downtime right now is, 15%, then start there and set goals to continuously improve that. Keep in mind that the more downtime you have, the higher spare count you're going to have, because you've got to offset that and have vehicles to put in service where you have unreliable vehicles. So start there, and then put together some targets, some what I call SMART goal targets. That'll help you drive down your percentage of downtime per vehicle. So really, continuous improvement is really the key there, and it really is more applicable to your fleet. Your internal goals and metrics are really the most important.
Great, thanks, Steve. Question two, what's the process for staffing a spec writer to prepare fleet-related specifications?
You know, this is not a real common question, but it should be in fleet. Most of the fleets that I personally manage, we had a spec writer in a couple of them, and I saw the value of doing that. I actually put together at one of the biggest beverage companies in the world a whole asset management team that did nothing but write specifications. And then when I was with a big garbage company there in Arizona, where RTA is based, did the same thing. Specifications are critical to your operation, obviously, because you have to have the right vehicle in the driver's hand to do the specific mission or job that they've been assigned to. So if I were to write or to put together a staffing specification to prepare for a spec writer, what I would do is I would look at, obviously, a fleet background. If they have an engineering background or some type of automotive engineering background, that would really be desirable. I think you need someone with some really good customer service skills that can work with people, someone that can go out in the field and meet with people one-on-one or in groups and be able to understand the exact job that the vehicle or the asset is going to be accomplishing, so that you can write all those detailed specifications around that mission. Someone that can lead a team, a leader, because you're going to be working with diverse individuals. Say, I used to put together a spec committee every year, and we would do an annual spec committee. And when we did that, what we did was bring all these different people together, like the vendors that are going to be participating in the specifications, so a couple of the users, some department heads, people like that would be on that committee. And we would come to a consensus on what we actually needed in each type of vehicle that we were going to go out and purchase and spec. I think a person should have some kind of analytical skills to be able to review costs and certainly operational data. And then I think purchasing experience is helpful. You should know what RFPs are, and which are requests for proposals, or RFIs, requests for information, things like that, because you're going to be doing a lot of interaction between yourself and some of the manufacturers to understand, the specs that drive their products. And then finally, good writing skills are a must, because you're going to have to assemble those specifications and those parameters and get them in some type of a document or in some kind of a format where you can actually go out to bid with different manufacturers to get competitive pricing. And then finally, good Excel skills, I think, are a must, because you're going to have to do a data analysis when it comes to getting back the results on those specifications that you put out there. So that's kind of a high-level list. I'm sure there's some other things that you might need in this position, but I think that's something where I would start.
I thought this question was very interesting. My own background is in mass communications journalism, so I basically have a writing degree. And when they teach you to write, they teach you how to write very non-industry specific. So I found it worth noting that you said you specifically wanted someone who had a fleet background rather than someone who had a writing background, even though the position is for writing. So, in your own words, the answer is not then to just go out and hire yourself a technical writer with no fleet experience. You would prefer a fleet background first and foremost.
That's a good question. I guess I probably err on the side of fleet bias for the most part, because that's obviously my background. Probably one of the things that you brought up a really good point. I know that when I've been working on specific documents in the fleet operation, technical writers are really key for this type of information, to write policies, specifications, things like that. So technical writing skills, I think, are huge.
All right, our next question. What fleet metrics have you been able to use to start justifying newer assets?
Yeah, this is a really good question. The person that proposed this question basically inherited or started at a new fleet that had absolutely no data, which is always a challenge. I remember years ago when I was managing a small city in the Northeast as a consultant, they had zero data, no fleet system, no spreadsheets, nothing. I mean, I basically had to put everything together in a year and a half to try and manage that fleet. So I really understand this question, and I really feel for this person trying to do that. He did, however, say that since January this year, he has been able to put together some data to start looking at. And the key to what he's trying to do is actually, and it sounded like to me, he's actually trying to come up with a replacement program for his fleet. And the reason for that, obviously, is he's probably, I have to surmise this because I don't have any more detail than what he put on the communities, but he's looking to come up with a way to justify newer assets. So that in itself means to me that he's got an old fleet. So one of the things that I used to do all the time when I was managing an old fleet is I would try and find known metrics somewhere in the industry. And I did a lot of pouring through a lot of data and a lot of websites when I was an early on fleet manager. And some of those resources I'll share with you. One like Automotive Fleet Magazine, which is a free publication and is quite widely known in the fleet industry, has a lot of light duty specifications where they gather a lot of specs and costs from some of the fleet management companies out there. And so they put together a grid every year that you can use kind of as a guideline. So you could take, if he has data from, say, January to this year, he probably has something like a cost per mile that he's accumulated. So this will give you an idea, or something you can compare your cost per mile to. Other good resources out there are the AAA Annual Vehicle Cost Guide. I use that quite a bit because it has just about every type of vehicle on that. So you can get a really good idea what those costs are. And if you're somewhere within those costs, you're probably doing okay. If you're way outside those costs, then it gives you some justification to start looking at purchasing newer vehicles, or at least heading down that path. Another one is ATRI. It's the American Trucking Research Institute. They put out an annual cost survey every year for Class 8 trucks, Class 7 trucks. So if you've got things like dump trucks or over-the-road trucks, there's things that are a lot bigger than your normal light-duty vehicles. This will give you at least a ballpark of what those cost per miles would be for those type of assets. And then finally, there are programs out there that are data centric, where people are actually taking vehicles from all different walks of life. One of those is Vincentric, and they're putting a lot of vehicles in those programs, and they're actually doing life cycle modeling. So if you wanted to purchase a program, that's one that you could purchase. Other things are, obviously seek out your peers in fleet management, ask them what they're doing for life cycles, particularly if they're running a fleet like you have. What are their life cycle modeling? How long do they keep a sedan? How long do they keep a pickup truck? Things like that. Compare your cost to their costs. What are they doing? What's your cost per mile? What's your cost per month? I always try to equate this when I was going through as a young fleet manager. Does your fleet cost or your car cost more than a car payment? I mean, that's something to think about, because put it in perspective, we all typically have cars. And if you finance a car and you're paying $800 a month for that car payment, your car should be in the neighborhood of somewhere between, $800, right? Because that's basically what we're doing as far as a comparison might be. The one thing I always tell people, and this seems like a no-brainer, but all the manufacturers, the OEMs, actually have a built-in life cycle model. It's called the warranty coverage period. So basically, I know people say, well, that's too short. They only cover my car for, 5 years or 3 years, or some of the drivetrains are up to 7 years now. Well, that's a pretty good idea on how long you should keep your vehicle, because they know how long that vehicle is going to last. So that's one of the first things you want to start looking at is, what is your warranty coverage? There's an old maxim in fleet, you don't want to be the guy spending the money outside the warranty. You want the next guy to spend that money. A lot of the big fleets now, over-the-road fleets like Night Transportation, some of those and Swift in the local Phoenix area, they're cycling their vehicles every 3 years, because that's as long as the warranty lasts, is 3 years. They don't want to incur those unpredictable costs that might come along with life cycling and breakdowns. So, and then finally, if you really want to get into it, you can go out and you can hire a consultant who specializes in fleet management replacement and can actually calculate optimal replacement cycles. Some consultants can bring a wealth of data from other fleets that they have or have not had data. So that also brings credibility to your fleet operation, where if you're brand new and you don't have a lot of data, some of the outside fleet consultants can come in and bring data that's relevant and timely and accurate. And they can also be a voice for you to explain to your leadership, if you have two vehicles that are too long in the lot, or too old and too costly, and they can give you some really good advice to help make that decision.
We actually recorded a podcast a couple episodes ago about when to hire a consultant. When's a good time, when's not a good time. So feel free to check that one out too.
I always obviously I was a consultant, but before I was a consultant, I was a fleet manager, and I always put in a budget for consulting. It's good to hire. They're just think of them as a temporary employee for one project. You wouldn't hire a full-time person for one project, but you could hire a consultant for one project. And that's kind of how I used to look at it.
And we are on to our final question today, Steve. How do you prepare to select the best fleet management software that'll work for your organization?
That's one of the things that this actually comes up a lot on NAFA communities. And so we watch that, obviously. When we're not on the Fleet Success podcast, we all work for RTA, Fleet Management, which is a fleet software. What I would always say is these are the questions I would ask. What are you looking for your fleet system to accomplish? Everything. If you've got a fleet that outsources most of your maintenance, you may not need a maintenance tracking piece to that software. Obviously, you probably want to track assets. You want to track fuel. You want to track maintenance repair costs internally or externally. You may or may not want to track employees or drivers. If you got an internal fleet or fleet shop, you might want to track parts and tires, things like that. So really think about what you want to track, and then make that the basis of what you're going to do as you're going through that process to start putting together what are the must-haves that you feel are most important. I've seen specifications and requirements for fleet systems that are 100 pages long. So, I mean, these can be quite detailed. And I've actually worked with people as a consultant to put together technical requirements for fleet systems. So that's where I would start, is I would look at that. I would then, talk to some of my peers, those in other fleets that may manage similar assets that you manage, and ask them what fleet system they're using. What do they like about their fleet system? What do they dislike about their fleet system? One of the questions that always comes up, no matter where you're at, is, how is the support of that system? There's nothing worse than having a fleet system, having a problem, getting on the phone and can't get a hold of anybody. So I think that's where I just start. That's one of the critical must-haves that you should be looking at, is, do they answer their calls live? Do you have to leave a message? Do you have to go through a phone tree, to try and get somebody? Because usually when you have a problem with your fleet system, you don't want to wait a week to get the answer. So that's something critical. Other things out there, how do other users rate the software? There's a lot of sites out there on the web, things like G2, Capterra, Software Advice, where a lot of the software users will actually go out there and rate these systems. And they'll give you good feedback. They'll tell you what they like, what they don't like about the system, the pros and cons about these systems. So those are the kind of things that you might want to go out there and do a little bit of homework and start gathering that data. Other things like, when you start interfacing with some of the fleet systems, I would advise everybody to start going through some demos. Ask them to provide maybe an hour or a 2-hour demo for you, carve out some time to go through, where you can do a question and answer period. You can have your team look at it so they can see exactly what that software does and doesn't do. Those kind of things are important. Ask them questions like, how timely are their updates? Do they do an update every couple of months? Do they do an update once a year? Things like that. That kind of gives you an idea on how active they are in the fleet community, and because the fleet community is constantly moving. There's things happening every week, basically, that you need to have different, like right now, a real hot topic, obviously, is electric vehicles. Are they updating their software to accommodate electric vehicles? Things like that. And then ask them questions like, how amenable are you to making custom changes? If I have something that I really need in my software, what's it going to take? Are you going to charge me a huge fee? Is it something that you have a set fee for? Those kinds of things are always a good thing. And then when you get ready, begin to schedule those demos and take a lot of notes, and have a team involved to do some assessment of those systems. Because I think it's always helpful to compare the systems. Every system has their pluses and their negatives, and so you want to be able to have a good list when you start to build your detailed specifications so that you can put together at some point an RFP for a competitive bid. And then obviously I'm big into consulting, so if you have the budget, and even if you don't, I would advise you to think about hiring a non-biased consultant with the knowledge about fleet software. They help you put together some specifications. They may be able to bring you information and anecdotal feedback from people that had other systems. If you had questions about systems, they might be able to tell you, what providers or people they've worked with said about those systems, similar to some of the software reviews we talked about earlier. And then many providers will set you up with a demo system to use and test. They'll kind of give you they call that giving you the baby to play with or to feed for a while. So just have them set up a little sandbox for you and go ahead and start using it. Put together like a little test test fleet and actually start using their software. I mean, the one thing I would tell you is, this is a careful, methodical, and patient process. Don't make this decision, too quickly and too willy-nilly, because you're going to be stuck with the software you choose for, chances are, years to come. So you want to make sure you get the right software. And then finally, I would ask, how flexible is the software? How do they interface with their programs like fuel programs, GPS programs, financial systems? Do they have built-in application programming interfaces or APIs? Or do they have to build APIs? And then do they charge you extra for those APIs? So lots of questions. If you don't know a lot about software and you don't know a lot about the inner workings of software, that will take you right back to the consultant that I mentioned earlier. I think that's always wise to do. So a couple of things to think about. Hopefully that helps, give you some food for thought as you're going through that process.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I know every time you talk fleet, I learn something new. So thank you always for your knowledge and expertise. If you guys have any questions of your own, we do these style podcasts every now and then. Send us an email at podcast@rtafleet.com, and we jump on here and we riff a little bit on your questions. Feel free to also email us if you want a copy of the Fleet Success Playbook. We're on the second run already of those, but fear not, we will not run out. As always, go follow us on all the social medias, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, MySpace. Just kidding, we don't have a MySpace. And head over to fleetsuccesssummit.com for info on the 2023 Fleet Success Summit, which will be at the Luxor in Las Vegas. More details to come, but just watch the website for that. Until next time, thanks everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Fleet Success Show. If you liked our show, we'd appreciate your 5-star review. Be sure to subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts and come hang out with us anywhere on social media at Fleet Success. See you next time.